Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, I want to try a little experiment with you. I want you to imagine you are sitting on your couch, maybe it's a rainy Tuesday evening, and you're holding your remote control. You're flipping through the channels, past the 24-hour news cycle, past the sports highlights, past those endless reruns of sitcoms from the 90s. And suddenly, you stumble across a channel you didn't know existed. It doesn't have a logo you recognize. Let's call it the Funeral Channel Network.
That sounds incredibly ominous, and yet I have a feeling I know exactly what the programming schedule looks like.
Stick with me here. You tune into this channel, and the aesthetic is it's unmistakable. You see the slow-motion footage of black cars lined up in the rain, headlights on in the middle of the day. You see the somber gathering, the scent of lilies practically coming through the screen, the eulogies being read by a trembling brother or a stoic daughter. It's that very specific, very heavy atmosphere we all recognize from movies or, unfortunately from real life.
It is a cultural script. We know exactly what that looks like. It's the visual language of loss.
Exactly. But here's the thing about this imaginary channel. Usually, in movies or TV shows or even in our own minds, once the coffin is lowered or the urn is placed and the cars drive away, the credits roll.
Right. The screen goes black.
The screen goes black. The music swells, the hero looks wistfully at the horizon, and the story ends.
We treat the funeral as the period at the end of the sentence of a life. It's the conclusion of the event. The narrative arc is complete.
But on this specific deep dive today, we're watching the extended cut. We are looking at what happens on that channel when the credits don't roll. We are looking at the silence that comes after the service. Our mission today is to explore the reality that begins the moment the last guest leaves the parking lot.
It is a profound shift in perspective. We are so conditioned to view the funeral as the main event of grief. It's the big day. It's the thing we plan for, dress for, and travel for. But if you look at the source material we are covering today, the funeral isn't the end. It's barely the beginning.
It's the prologue to the actual struggle. And frankly, this is the stuff that scares me more than the funeral itself. The funeral has a script. The aftermath. That feels like free falling without a parachute.
That is a very apt analogy. The mission, as you put it, of this deep dive is to validate that freefall. We need to unpack the loneliness, the administrative nightmares, which are truly nightmares, by the way.
We'll get to those.
The identity crises and the sheer exhaustion that hits when the world thinks you should be moving on.
So let's set the scene before we tear it down. We are at the funeral. The source describes it as a visible ending. It's a sensory overload.
It is. Let's look at that paradox. The funeral is loud. It is visual. It is tactile. The source material paints this picture vividly. The room is full of voices. There are stacks of cards. The scent of flowers is heavy in the air, lilies, carnations, that very specific smell. People are hugging you, touching your arm, handing you casseroles.
It's a support bubble.
Precisely. For that brief window, maybe 3 days, maybe a week. Grief is a communal activity. It is shared. It is witnessed. You are the center of a community that has mobilized to hold you up. It's almost tribal. Everyone has a role.
And even though it's tragic, there's a weird safety in that, right?
Yeah.
Like you have a role to play too. You are the griever. People tell you where to stand, when to sit, what to sign. You are being carried by the ritual. You don't have to think. You just have to be.
And then the pivot happens. The source describes this moment so starkly. The cars leave the parking lot. The chairs are folded up. The flowers start to wilt, which, by the way, is a depressing metaphor in itself.
Oh, yeah.
And the messages stop coming in. The funeral channel goes silent.
And the central thesis of everything we are looking at today is that the hardest part of death isn't the dying and it isn't the burying. It is the living that comes immediately after when the structure disappears.
Correct. The structure evaporates. And that brings us to the first real shock of the aftermath.
Let's dig into that day one of the aftermath. Segment one of our deep dive is what I'm calling the emotional drop-off. Because I think logically we assume grief is a straight line, right? Something bad happens, you feel terrible, 100% bad, and then every day you feel, say, 1% better, a linear recovery.
Right. That's the myth.
But the source says it's actually the opposite. Grief often gets worse immediately after the funeral. Why is that?
It comes down to biology and psychology. The source talks about survival mode. Think about what goes into planning a funeral. It is essentially planning a wedding in 3 days, but with devastating sadness attached to it.
And usually while you're in shock.
Exactly. You are running on cortisol and adrenaline. You are task-focused. You have to choose the casket, write the obituary, coordinate with the funeral home, pick the music, greet the relatives who flew in from across the country. You don't have time to actually feel the loss because you are too busy managing the loss.
So you're in this high-stakes performance mode. You're holding it together because you have to. You're the producer of the event.
And then the event ends. The guests fly home. The adrenaline fades. And what happens biologically when adrenaline leaves the system? You crash.
The crash.
The source calls it the emotional drop-off. It's not just that you are sad, it's that you are physically and mentally depleted. The structure that was holding you up, the to-do list, is gone, and suddenly the full weight of the reality settles in. It's like running a marathon on a broken leg because you didn't feel the pain due to shock, and then stopping at the finish line and realizing your leg is shattered.
The source lists some symptoms here that are really interesting because they don't just sound like sadness. They sound almost like a medical condition. Emptiness, disorientation, numbness giving way to sudden emotional waves.
Disorientation is a key word there. You wake up the morning after the funeral, or the Monday after everyone has gone home, and the silence is deafening. The source contrasts the noise of the funeral week, the constant dinging of the phone, the doorbell ringing, with the sudden silence.
And that silence is tricky, isn't it? Because from the outside, from the perspective of the friends and the neighbors, they probably think, okay, the funeral is done. They need rest. We should leave them alone to get back to normal.
That is the great misinterpretation. It's the fundamental disconnect between the griever and the observer. The friends think they are being respectful, saving space. They assume the crisis is over because the ritual is over. But for the griever, the crisis is just starting. The source is very clear on this. To the person sitting in that quiet house, that silence doesn't feel like respect. It feels like abandonment.
It feels like everyone moved on, like the world kept spinning and you were left at the bus stop.
And it's rarely malice. We have to be fair to the friends and family. It's usually uncertainty. They don't know what to say. They fear that if they call, they'll remind you of the death, as if you could possibly forget.
Right.
So they say nothing. And that silence reinforces this terrible isolation.
I want to pause on that idea of reminding someone. We see that come up later in the source material regarding the Voldemort effect. But it starts here. The silence is born out of awkwardness.
It is. We are a culture that doesn't do sad very well. We fix things. We optimize things. We treat grief like a problem to be solved. And when the funeral is over and the person is still sad, we don't know what to do with them, so we retreat.
Which leaves the griever alone in their house. And this brings us to the shock of ordinary days. Because the funeral is an extraordinary event. It's a heightened reality. But eventually, you have to do the laundry. You have to make post.
The return to the mundane. This is often where the sharpest pain lies. The source describes this as the internal versus external conflict.
Explain that a bit more. What's the conflict?
Well, look out the window. The mailman is delivering mail. The neighbors are mowing the lawn. The sun is coming up. The external world is functioning exactly as it did 2 weeks ago. But your internal world has been nuked. It is completely altered. That dissonance, seeing the world refuse to stop for your pain, is jarring. It feels disrespectful that the sun dared to rise.
And the source gives some really specific gut punch examples of this. It's not the big abstract thoughts about death that get you in these moments. It's the groceries.
It is the groceries. It's standing in the aisle and automatically reaching for the brand of cereal they liked. Maybe the sugary stuff you hated but bought for them, and then realizing mid-reach that you don't need to buy it anymore. You put the box back. That physical action of putting the box back is a fresh trauma.
Or cooking dinner.
Yes. If you have cooked for 2 people for 30 years, your hands know how much pasta to boil. Your muscle memory is calibrated to we. Suddenly, you have to relearn how to cook for I. You make too much food. You stare at the leftovers. The leftovers become a symbol of the death.
Oh, man. The leftovers as a symbol of death.
Yeah.
That's bleak. But it's so real. It's a tangible, quantifiable example of the loss sitting in your Tupperware.
And the source mentions coming home to absolute silence or reaching for the phone to call them when something funny happens. That creates a micro grief spike. Every time you reach for the phone and remember you can't make the call, you lose them all over again.
It's like 1,000 little funerals every day.
That is a hauntingly accurate way to put it. These everyday moments hurt more than the formal ceremony because they are ungirded. At the funeral, you have your armor on, you expect to be sad, but in your kitchen, in your pajamas, staring at an empty chair, you are naked, you are vulnerable, you aren't the widow or the grieving son performing a role, you're just a person missing another person.
And then, to make matters worse, we have to talk about the workplace. Because unless you are independently wealthy, eventually you have to go back to work. And the source calls out the back to work myth,
This is a systemic failure we see constantly. Bereavement leave in the US and many other places, if you get it at all, is usually 3 to 5 days.
which is barely enough time to plan the funeral, let alone grieve.
Exactly. So you are back at your desk, maybe a week after the most traumatic event of your life, and the expectation is productivity. The expectation is that you are back.
Glad to have you back. Hope you're doing okay. And they drop a spreadsheet on your desk.
Right. And you might look fine. You aren't wearing a black veil. You aren't sobbing at your cubicle. This is the invisible shield the source talks about. You mask the grief to make others comfortable and to keep your job. But underneath, the cognitive struggle is immense.
The source lists things like loss of concentration, lack of motivation, fatigue. It's basically brain fog, isn't it?
It is. We call it grief brain. Grief is physically exhausting. It rewires your neural pathways. You might be staring at a screen, reading the same email 5 times, and it just won't register. Your processing speed drops. But because you aren't crying, coworkers assume recovery has occurred. They assume the silence means fixed.
It's almost like presenteeism. You're physically there, but you aren't really there.
And you're spending 80% of your energy just trying to appear normal. That leaves 20% for the actual work.
So you're fighting a war on two fronts. You're fighting the grief at home, and you're fighting the appearance of normalcy at work. That sounds sustainable for about 0 days.
It often leads to burnout, or what the source describes as emotional regulation issues. You might snap at a colleague over a stapler, not because of the stapler, but because you are carrying a mountain of unprocessed grief and you have zero patience left for trivialities.
And speaking of mountains, let's pivot to the most boring yet brutal part of this funeral channel reality show, the paperwork, segment 3, the administrative avalanche.
We truly do not warn people about this enough. Death is a bureaucracy.
It really is. You think of death as the spiritual, emotional event, but it's also a legal event. And the amount of admin that drops on you right when you are least capable of handling it is staggering.
The funeral program site notes that families are almost always unprepared for the volume of decisions after the service. We aren't just talking about paying the florist. We are talking about closing out a life.
Let's get specific here. What does that actually look like?
It starts with the death certificates.
How many do you need? I feel like people order 1 or 2.
Oh, no. You need 10, maybe 20. Because you need an original certified copy for the bank, one for the life insurance, one for the car title transfer, one for the utility company, one for the credit card companies. It's endless.
And you have to send them in the mail.
Often, yes. And every time you have to present that certificate, you are having that conversation again. You call customer service, you wait on hold for 40 minutes, you finally get a human. You say, "My husband died, I need to close the account." They transfer you to the bereavement department. You say it again, it's administrative trauma.
And this is happening when you have that grief brain we just talked about. You can barely decide what to eat for lunch, and now you have to make complex decisions about estate taxes and probate.
It is decision fatigue in its most extreme form. The source emphasizes that these tasks require high executive function logic, patience, organization, exactly the things the bereaved absolutely do not have. It feels like running a marathon while filling out tax forms.
And there's a cruelty to it, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because you're erasing them.
Yes. Canceling a subscription. Deleting their name from the joint account. Turning off their cell phone service. That one is particularly hard, disconnecting the line. It feels like cutting the last wire.
I hadn't thought about the cell phone. That's their number. That's the number you've called for 20 years, and you have to sign a paper to make it stop working.
It's a secondary loss. And that brings us to the other kind of secondary loss the source mentions, the people, the drift.
This is a concept that I found really sad but important. The idea that when you lose a person, you don't just lose them, you lose a chunk of your social circle too.
Yes, it's a painful reality. Some friends will step up and be heroes. They'll be there every day. But others, they drift away. And it's usually the people you didn't expect to leave.
Why do they do that? Is it just that they can't handle the sadness? Or are they bad friends?
Rarely are they bad people. It comes back to that discomfort with prolonged grief. People are okay with the acute phase, the funeral. But 3 months later, if you are still sad, some friends feel helpless. They don't know how to fix it, so they withdraw to avoid the awkwardness. They want the old you back, the fun you, the party you. And when the old you doesn't return, the friendship fractures.
That's heartbreaking. So you lose your spouse or your parent, and then you lose your Friday night dinner buddies, too.
It is a compounding loss. It changes your address book. You realize your social circle was perhaps built around the couple, not just you. Or it was built around good times.
And it happens inside families, too, right? The source mentions family dynamics getting weird.
Oh, absolutely. The funeral is a project that unites the family. Everyone has a job. You get the flowers, I'll call the priest. Once the project is over, the differences in coping styles emerge.
Give me an example of that.
Well, imagine a brother and a sister grieving their mother. The sister is an instrumental griever. She wants to do things. She wants to clean out the closet, organize the charity donations, stay busy. The brother is an intuitive griever. He wants to feel. He wants to sit on the couch and look at photo albums and cry.
I can see the conflict already.
The sister looks at the brother and thinks, he's wallowing, he's lazy. The brother looks at the sister and thinks, she's cold. She's throwing mom's stuff away. She doesn't care. They are both grieving, but their styles are incompatible. Without the structure of the funeral to bind them, families can splinter under this pressure.
This brings us to the internal world. We've talked about the admin, the work, the friends, the family, but what's happening inside your own head? Segment 4 explores the internal landscape, and specifically this buzzword that we all love to hate, closure.
The myth of closure, the most dangerous word in the English language regarding grief.
The source calls it the closure trap.
Yeah.
Why is closure a trap? It sounds nice, it sounds clean.
That's exactly why it's a trap. It implies a clean ending. It implies that grief is a door you can shut and lock. Okay, had the funeral, cried the tears, got closure, moving on. That is a Hollywood narrative. It is not a human narrative.
So the funeral isn't a final goodbye?
No. The source argues that grief rarely offers neat endings. In fact, after the funeral, questions often intensify. Regret surfaces. Did I do enough? Did I say enough? Why didn't I force them to go to the doctor sooner? The longing deepens because the reality of forever is setting in.
So if we aren't aiming for closure, what are we aiming for?
Integration.
Yeah.
Learning to carry the loss, not get over it. The key takeaway here is that grief evolves. It doesn't conclude. It changes shape, but it doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the furniture of your mind.
That makes sense, but that evolution, it forces an identity crisis. The source asks some heavy existential questions. Who am I without this person?
This is especially profound for spouses or parents who have lost a child. If your identity was husband or mother and that person is gone, the foundation of your self-perception crumbles. You aren't just grieving them, you are grieving the version of yourself that existed in relation to them.
What does my future look like now? That's a terrifying question when you had a plan and the plan blew up.
It creates a vacuum. And in that vacuum, a very insidious emotion tends to creep in: guilt.
Let's unpack the guilt.
Yeah.
Because the source mentions some types of guilt that I think people would be ashamed to admit to, but are probably super common.
Yes. There is the standard guilt of, I should have done more, but there is also the guilt of living. The guilt of laughing at a joke 3 weeks after the funeral.
You catch yourself smiling and then immediately smack yourself down.
Exactly. How can I enjoy this coffee? How can I laugh at this sitcom? They are dead. They can't laugh. I shouldn't be allowed to laugh. It feels like a betrayal to feel anything other than misery.
And then there's the guilt of relief. That's a heavy one. If the person was sick for a long time.
That is the unspoken taboo. If you were a caregiver for years, watching someone suffer, managing their meds, changing their sheets, when they pass, there's an immense sense of relief. Relief that the suffering is over, yes, but also relief that the burden of care is lifted. You can sleep through the night. You can leave the house.
And then immediately you feel like a monster for feeling relieved.
A tidal wave of guilt. I'm glad they're dead. No, you aren't glad they are dead. You are glad the trauma has paused. But it's a complex, conflicting emotional soup.
And nobody talks about that at the funeral.
Never. That is the private storm.
I want to touch on the how are you phenomenon mentioned in the source, because this is a major part of the post-funeral silence and the social pressure we discussed.
It's the question that disappears or becomes a trap. Before the funeral, everyone asks, how are you holding up? After the funeral, if they ask, how are you? There is a social contract that says the answer must be fine.
Right. If you answer, how are you, with, actually, I'm devastated and I haven't slept in 4 days and I'm thinking about death constantly, you ruin the dinner party.
You break the script. You make people uncomfortable, so the griever learns to perform wellness. They say, I'm hanging in there or taking it one day at a time, while internally they are screaming, it's a performance.
And then there's the Voldemort effect. I love this term. Well, I hate the reality of it, but it's a great name. People are terrified to say the deceased person's name.
It's the elephant in the room. People think, if I bring up Bob, it will remind Susan that Bob is dead and she will be sad.
As if Susan isn't thinking about Bob every single second anyway.
Exactly. That is the fallacy. You cannot remind a grieving person of their loss. They are living in it. By not mentioning Bob, you are essentially erasing him. You are signaling that his name is dangerous or taboo.
And the source says the truth is the opposite. The griever wants to hear the name.
Desperately. They want to know that their loved one is remembered. They want to hear stories. Avoiding the name is far more painful than hearing it because avoiding it feels like a second death. It feels like the world is forgetting they existed.
Wow. That's a powerful reframing. So if you're listening and you're worried about upsetting your friend by mentioning their late husband, mention him.
Always mention him. Say his name. It validates that he was here and he mattered.
Okay, we've covered the heavy, heavy stuff. The silence, the admin, the guilt, the identity crisis. Now let's try to turn the ship a little bit towards navigation. Segment 5, strategies for the after. If the funeral isn't the end and the silence is brutal, how do we survive it?
The first step is normalizing the waves. We need to throw out the 5 stages of grief: linear model denial, anger, bargaining, etc. That model was actually written for people who are dying, not for the survivors.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for grief.
It's not a checklist. You don't do anger on Tuesday and check it off.
No. The source describes grief coming in waves. You might have a good week where you feel functional. You think, oh, I'm getting better. And then a smell, a song on the radio, or just a quiet Tuesday afternoon triggers a tsunami.
The unexpected return.
Yes. And the strategy here is to expect it. Don't view a bad day as a setback. Don't think, I was doing so well, now I'm back to square one. You weren't. You were just in a wave. You have to ride it out rather than fighting it.
And the source warns about the comparison trap, watching other people move on while you are stuck.
That is deadly.
Yeah.
Seeing others laugh and live while you are frozen. But the source frames this beautifully. Your grief is a reflection of your attachment. The depth of the pain mirrors the depth of the love. It's not a weakness. It's a testament to the bond.
That's a nice way to look at it. The pain is the receipt for the love.
Precisely. Now, practically speaking, what do we do with that love? Because love with nowhere to go turns into grief. The source suggests ongoing memorialization as anchors.
Anchors, I like that word. Because otherwise you're drifting in that free fall we talked about.
Right. If the funeral is the public ritual, you need private rituals. You need a place for the grief to go.
What are some actionable examples from the source? Not just think happy thoughts.
It can be simple. Visiting the gravesite is the obvious one, but it can be creating a small space in your home. A candle next to a photo.
A shrine. That sounds a bit heavy for some people.
It doesn't have to be a shrine, just a focal point. Maybe you light a specific candle on Friday evenings. Maybe you keep their watch on your nightstand. Journaling is huge, writing letters to the deceased.
Why does this work? Is it just keeping busy?
No, it validates the grief. It says, my relationship with this person is continuing, just in a different form. It externalizes the feelings so they don't rot inside you. It provides a container for the emotion. It gives you permission to spend 10 minutes being sad so you don't have to be sad the other 23 hours.
So instead of trying to push the grief away, you give it a chair in the corner of the room. You acknowledge it.
Exactly. You integrate it into your life.
Now, I want to talk to the listeners who aren't the primary griever right now, but who are the friends, the neighbors, the cousins. Because we've established that let me know if you need anything is useless.
It is worse than useless. It puts the burden on the griever to manage you. It forces them to come up with a task and ask for it, which takes energy they don't have.
So what is the playbook for how to actually help?
The playbook is specific. First, timing. Check in weeks later.
Not just the first week.
Everyone is there the first week. The house is full of lasagna. Be the person who calls in week 3, week 6, month 4. That is when the silence is loudest. That is when the casseroles have run out. Set a reminder in your own calendar. Call Susan 3 months from now.
That's smart. And remember the firsts.
The calendar is a minefield. The first weekend alone. The first birthday. The holidays. If you know a specific date is coming up, reach out before it happens. I know Tuesday is his birthday. I'm thinking of you. That simple text can be a lifeline. It says, I remember too.
And going back to the Voldemort effect, speak the name.
Speak the name, share a memory. I was just thinking about how much Dave loved this song. It tells the griever they aren't carrying the memory alone.
And finally, offer specific help. Don't say, can I help? Say, what?
Say, I am going to the grocery store on Tuesday. Send me your list, or I will pick up milk and bread and drop it on your porch. Say, I'm coming over to mow the lawn on Saturday.
I'm taking your kids to the movies for 3 hours so you can nap.
Yes. Concrete actions that require zero executive function from the griever. You aren't asking, what do you need? You're saying, here is what I am doing for you. That is real help.
That's huge. It shifts the dynamic from polite offer to active support.
It pierces the silence.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the funeral channel, let's recap what we've watched. We've seen that the funeral is just a moment, a blip. The real story happens in the silence that follows.
We've validated that the emotional drop-off is real and biological. We've acknowledged the brutality of the administrative avalanche, the paperwork, the phone calls. We've discussed the invisible shield at work and the identity crisis at home. And we've exposed the myth of closure.
And the mission was to validate the loneliness. If you are listening to this and you are in that silence right now, we see you. The funeral channel might be off the air for everyone else, but we know you were still watching it.
And that leads to our final thought, the concept of the long arc.
What is the long arc?
It's the understanding that grief is not a problem to be solved. It's a process to be witnessed. In a world that is obsessed with speed, with moving on, with fixing things, grief refuses to be rushed.
It's the one thing you can't hack. You can't optimize it. You can't 80-20 it.
You cannot. You can only endure it and integrate it. And the challenge for all of us, whether we are the ones grieving or the ones watching, is this. Can we sit in the silence? Can we be the people who don't turn away when the credits don't roll?
Can we let grief just be? That's a tough ask, but I think it's the only way through.
It is. It requires patience, gentleness, and courage. But it is the most human thing we can do.
Well, that's a lot to sit with. But I'm glad we tuned in. Thanks for exploring the silence with us.
It was a privilege.
And to our listener, thanks for tuning into this channel. We'll see you on the next deep dive. Take care of yourselves.
Goodbye.
Okay, wait, hold on. Before we completely cut the feed, I want to circle back to something you said earlier that I feel like we breezed past, but it's actually kind of the crux of everything. You mentioned the identity crisis. We talked about it briefly. Who am I without this person? I want to dig deeper into the why of that. Why does the silence specifically trigger that identity collapse?
That's a great catch. Let's reopen the channel for a minute. Think about how we construct our identities. We are social creatures. We define ourselves through reflection. I know who I am because of how I interact with you, with my partner, with my colleagues.
Right. I'm a friend because I have friends. I'm a husband because I have a wife. It's relational.
Exactly. It's a feedback loop. When a primary connection is severed, a spouse, a parent, a child, that mirror shatters. You send out a signal, honey, look at this. And there is no reflection back. The silence isn't just a lack of noise, it's a lack of feedback.
So you're essentially broadcasting into the void.
Yes. And without that feedback, your sense of self starts to fray. That's why the silence is so disorienting. It's not just, I miss them. It's, I can't locate myself in the room anymore because the person who anchored me is gone.
It explains the disorientation symptom we listed in segment 1. It's a literal loss of bearing, like losing GPS signal.
It is. And the source touches on this with the guilt section too. Part of that guilt comes from the fear that if you change, if you form a new identity, you are leaving them behind.
Oh, that's heavy. So if I learn to be happy as a single person, does that mean I'm betraying the couplehood we had?
That is the central conflict of the after, the struggle to build a new life that includes the memory of the deceased, but isn't defined solely by their absence. It's a terrifying leap.
And this connects back to the secondary losses too. When friends drift away, it's another crack in the mirror.
Correct. If your friends knew you as the couple and now you are the widow, they don't know how to reflect you back to yourself either. They're confused, you are confused, and often the relationship collapses under that confusion.
So practically, how do you rebuild that identity in the silence? We talked about memorials, but what about the internal work?
It takes time. That's the long arc. You have to slowly, painfully piece together a new reflection. You try new things. You might fail. You might realize, I hate cooking, now that you don't have to cook for them. Or I actually love traveling alone, even if it makes you feel guilty at first.
You're discovering a stranger in your own body.
In a way, yes. Grief forces a rebirth. It's a violent, unwanted rebirth, but a rebirth nonetheless. And the silence is the incubator for that.
That makes the silence sound almost necessary. Painful, but necessary.
It is. If we filled the air with noise forever, if the funeral never ended, you would never have the space to figure out who you are now. The silence is where the reconstruction happens.
That's a profound shift. From silence as abandonment to silence as space for reconstruction.
It can be both.
Yeah.
And usually it starts as abandonment and slowly transforms into space, but that takes a long time.
And a lot of patience.
And a lot of witnessing. Which brings us back to why we are here, to witness that process.
I'm glad we circled back to that. It feels like the missing puzzle piece. The silence isn't just an empty room. It's a construction site.
A very messy, very loud, quiet construction site.
A loud, quiet construction site. Perfect. Okay, I think we've truly unpacked it now.
I believe so.
All right, for real this time. Thanks for listening.
Take care.